The objective of my research was to explore the relationship between ethnocentrism and news media consumption through the lens of globalization. To begin, let's look at some key terms relevant to this topic. Media is a broad term used to describe a wide variety of channels through which mass communication of information takes place. I narrowed my focus to investigate digital news media, as our dependency on this form is rapidly increasing compared to broadcasted and printed formats. The internet and other technological advances have made digital media an important method for accessing news. It can be found on web pages with published digital articles or videos, while other avenues include phone apps or video sharing platforms like YouTube. Social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are also becoming increasingly popular as news resources. Ethnocentric bias or ethnocentrism denotes an outlook facilitated by a sense of shared identity, expressing a preference for characteristics of one's in-group while rejecting those of the out-group. One may feel that their race, religion, political views, or society is superior to those which differ. An example could include viewing one's lifestyle as civilized while viewing other groups as backwards or savage. Alternatively, someone can exhibit xenocentric bias, which represents a preference of characteristics associated with the outgroup. An example of this could be people seeking to immigrate to another country with the belief that another nation is superior to their own. Nationalism and cosmopolitanism are also important terms as they describe in-group, out-group attitudes regarding exclusionary or integrative responses with respect to cultural and national identity. Nationalism is ethnocentric bias relating to nationality, characterized by a strong desire to promote the interests of their country, especially to the exclusion or detriment of interests of other nations. One might feel that too much foreign influence might infringe on their ability to maintain autonomy. Conversely, cosmopolitanism denotes an individual's openness to cultural diversity and willingness to navigate through intercultural environments. This concept more closely aligns with notions of cultural relativism, which is often viewed as the antithesis of ethnocentrism. Cultural relativism and cosmopolitanism permit coexistence despite differences. My suspicion prior to conducting research for this project was that news media played a large role in facilitating and shaping ethnocentric bias. However, the literature on this topic advocated a different dynamic. Rather than exposure to news shaping our worldviews and instilling bias, it appears more likely that the way that news is presented and hints of partisanship by which a story is spun has more to do with the news outlets indulging the bias of their audience in order to gain greater viewership. Given the immense availability of different news outlets, an article published this year in the Journal of Mass Communication and Society suggests that consumption of news is no passive endeavor. Rather, people are crafting media diets to suit their pre-existing biases. The psychology behind selective consumption is attributed to an inherent desire to avoid cognitive dissonance. The article states, "It is argued that it requires less cognitive effort and engagement to process like-minded information as compared to information that converges with pre-existing views, and that cognitive dissonance theory suggests that people are biased toward their in-group in order to maintain and strengthen a positive and internally consistent self-image." The avoidance of cognitive dissonance is often referred to as confirmation bias. Cognitive dissonance theory raises an important idea pertaining to whether or not ethnocentrism is a default bias through which humans try to maintain a consistent self-image and spare cognitive energy. Another relevant form of bias is negativity bias. Negativity bias suggests that people exhibit an unconscious preference for negative news over positive news. Negative news contains more arousing elements that tap into an inherent survival mechanism to scan our environment for threats. As a result, negative news stories have a higher news value and are considered instrumental in competition between media news outlets in garnering audience attention. Since ethnocentrism and nationalism can include negative attitudes towards outgroup populations, news that highlights these perceived negative qualities might be more attractive to certain audiences and more heavily featured by certain news sources. If we accept that bias in news media is often tailored to fit the inclinations of target audiences, then we should explore what factors might incline a person to exhibit ethnocentric bias or not. An article published in the American Journal of Economics and Sociology in 2012 studied connections between globalization and ethnocentrism. ethnocentrism. Significant findings included a strong positive correlation between age and ethnocentric bias. Older people were shown to express ethnocentric bias at a higher rate than younger people. The study also showed that higher education attainment corresponded with less instances of ethnocentrism. Another study published the following year stated that education was often seen as the most important predictor of tolerance towards ethnic minorities. The article stated, "Schooling introduces children and adolescents to civic norms and values like tolerance. Higher educated individuals will therefore be more successful in understanding the principles of tolerance and equality, and they will be able to generalize these principles to ethnic minorities. Furthermore, high education levels are associated with a stronger cognitive capacity to learn about the outgroup." Lastly, I believe it's important to consider how the consumption of news has become a social activity. The ability to instantly share links to news media directly from our social networking account creates a unique dynamic that serves to strengthen common identities amongst in-groups as we select content to promote the validity of our viewpoint. This virtual realm of promoting one's values through the sharing of news media highlights key aspects of globalization as portrayed by Erickson in our textbook, mainly disembedding the abstraction of social life from a spatially fixed context. Speed, as the sharing of information is more rapid than ever before, and not restricted by as many boundaries. Connections, the ability to connect with others more frequently and in greater capacity. Identity politics, the perception of pressures brought about by globalization by means of standardization and universal values that appear to compromise unique and local characteristics. Awareness of this perceived threat might be artificially magnified by negative news, which could, in turn, strengthen one's impression that they need to protect their identity, leading to a heightened output of ethnocentric rhetoric on social media platforms. Due to the time constraints of this presentation, I am unable to expand further on this complex topic, but I hope this information will serve to expand your awareness of different types of bias, the ways in which our interaction with news media is impacted by bias, and how elements of globalization may facilitate a strengthened sense of ethnocentric bias as a result of individual traits and circumstances.